A little birdie told me that JLA wants to do a podcast.
Well, I say we should just title it Stacy, Willow, Colleen, and Jennifer whenever the fuck she wants.
Welcome to Sex, Lies, and Blank Pages with our special guest, Jennifer Armentrout.
Hi, it's so
Yay,
wonderful to have you
welcome.
on.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I love listening to podcasts, and I was like, I want to do a podcast. And then it was like little magical birdies appeared in my DM.
We're like,
Yes.
we're like, you asked even in your head, and we responded. We're like, oh,
Yes.
hey, we're here. So yes, the door is always open for you. Whenever you have an idea or thought,
And you want to pop on?
platform's
Yeah.
yours, girl.
Yes.
So we'll change the title.
Yeah. So we know you. We obviously know you, but for everybody out there, do you want to give us just a little bit of background?
Yes. So most people would know me as Jennifer L. Armentrout. I write a whole mix of different genres, contemporary, mystery, paranormal, fantasy, thriller. The only thing I pretty much do not write is inspirational. So that's about it. But all of them are rooted in romance. And I've written in young adult, new adult, and adult. So I've written about, I think, my I think my 69th book was published in
Hey.
July, which I was like, yeah, like
That
I was
is
like,
amazing.
pause on. Right.
yeah, when that happened, I was like, hee hee.
And how many years have you been in the industry?
Published. My first book was published in early 2011 or late 2010. And then I, was writing to be published since about 2008, 2009. So it's been a while.
Yeah, so 13
but you came
years.
up in that wave. Yeah, you
Yeah.
came up in that
Mhm.
wave where like all of a sudden self-publishing was just starting out. Was that like the inspiration? I mean, were you looking to do that kind of thing at that time, or was that just kind of handed like, oh great, I'm going to do this
Well,
over here too?
For when I got started, self-publishing was still very much frowned upon. It was at that time, and I think that's something that even I forget what it was like when I first started, that you could name maybe two self-published authors that, had kind of made it, which was like Amanda, oh my gosh, Hawkins, and
Hawkins, yeah.
Hugh Howey, I think are the two. And that was it. You were pretty much across the board seen as not a real author. You were often not accepted at review blogs. And I'll never forget this. And that also includes small presses. So even if you weren't self-published and you were publishing with a small publisher, you still were not considered as good as. And so that was like 2010 to 2011. And I think it was roughly around 2012. And at the end of 2011 is when it started to change. Like it started to shift.
And
And-
Stacey, when did you come in?
2013 was my first book, so it
right
still
around
had
there.
a little. It still
Yeah.
had the little of the. Oh, you can
little-
get into how like it
Yeah.
still
Well,
had
I
that
was
taint to
in
it. Yeah.
2017, and even though the community was accepting, there was still that stigma, and there still is a little bit.
There is, yeah.
And we haven't talked about that. Not really. So I'm glad that you brought that up. But so you have probably seen some wild shit.
Wild changes.
Oh, I have seen some shit.
You're like, girl,
Yeah.
I've seen it all.
So when I first started publishing, it was in young adult, and still is mostly traditionally dominated. And the reason being is something that you often forget and overlook. Teenagers usually do not have methods of payment to buy stuff online. So they pick up books and stuff in school, and apparently they do not like to read on a device, which is so strange because they're always on a device. I don't understand that. But that's just apparently something that they still have not really switched into, is reading like on like Kindles and things like that.
I think
So
it's probably the schools, because
Yeah.
at schools they go to the library, so it's a compartmentalization more than likely.
Yeah, and it's almost like that's what they were groomed to do. It's like when you read,
Exactly.
you have a book in your hand.
Exactly. And then they
so-
have a budget, and they can't do that anymore. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and so like you pretty much had to be traditionally published, or that's what I was coming into. It's like you had that one avenue. And I had gone through the process, you know, I sent out like a metric ton of queries before I ended up working with a small press, Spencer Hill. And I don't even think they're in existence anymore. But I was very, very lucky because for some reason, the bloggers, the book bloggers had gotten behind my first book. And they majorly supported it, treated, you know, most of them, not all of them, but many of them treated it as it was just any other book, right? Because at that point, more adults were reading on adult than young adults was.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, so they were buying it digitally or ordering the paperback online. So I got lucky that way, but I could just tell you the first RT book, so many people won't even know what RT is anymore. But
like we might have to define it to the youngins out there.
For the youngins, RT was the Romance Time Book Convention, and it was held once a year. It moved around all across the United States. It would bring in several hundred authors, and it would have several thousand attendees. Like you're looking at double, like you would take a Polycon and Book Bonanza, add that together, and then times it sometime, depending on what's going on that year. And it was a huge convention, and it's like you wanted to go, like and it was very expensive to attend. It was, but also it was, I think, it was 4 or 5 days long, right? I think it kicked off on a Tuesday.
So I've never actually been to one, so I don't know. Yes, I know.
That's it.
You were
She's kicked out of the club. She's
I know, right?
she's the youngin. She's the
youngin. So, but I'm very excited to hear, and I'm hoping that you're gonna say you had your Pretty Woman moment. Did you have that moment at the convention?
Kinda, but it was not. Well, yeah. I mean, eventually, I think I did, but like at that, but it was like I think for authors, it was like over $400 to sign up, and then for attendees, it was roughly around the same price. But they had like 4 to 5 days of like nonstop panels. So they had reader focus panels, and then they had at the same time the industry track panels that would run. They would have all these events that would be held in the evening, these costume parties, and then the big signing was on the Saturday. And in the YA section, you had what they called YA Alley. And if you were like a quote unquote popular author, they would have to ticket you and pull you out, and they would put those authors like pretty much up against the wall to try to control their lines. And I remember I think my first RT was 2012 or 2013. And I had a couple books come out. I've had like, I think the first 2 books in the Covenant series, and then the Lux series had came out. So I had the first 2 books. Yeah. And that was my YA book that got, you know, somewhat popular, was that series. And I'm sitting there, and keep in mind, like, we're all very new. And I'm sitting next to Leigh Bardugo, and she's also, you know, Shadow and Bone author. Mm-hmm. And she's new too. We all published at the same time. So we're just baby authors, basically. And she was super nice. And Josephina Angelina, who I do think she still writes, was on my other side. And there was this other YA author. And because this group of YA authors controlled the young adult track. So they determined who got on panels, where you sat at, if you got pulled out, whatever. So if you were not, I guess, good enough in their mind, you didn't even get on panels. Like I mean, it was impossible. Yeah. And so I will never forget this. I'm sitting there, and this author, like, she comes up and she's introducing herself to like all the authors, right, that are like right down the line. And because when they set you alphabetically, so they don't set you by how you're published. And she literally introduces herself to Leigh, bypasses me, goes on to the next person. Oh. And I remember sitting there like, oh
that's
my God,
rude.
Did that really just happen? And the funny thing, and I started laughing because I couldn't help it, because I was like, that really happened. And like, and also like, I think I felt more bad for like Leigh and everybody, because they were like, because, you know, it's like
awkward,
secondhand embarrassment, right? You're just like,
and what people don't know, like, shit like that still happens, especially with newer authors. And I think what people don't understand is we will remember, like, I'm sure you know her name and that's a Pretty Woman moment right there. And for the youngins who don't know what Pretty Woman moment is, it's when somebody initially turns you down and makes a judgment, and then later on they see your glow up, and you get to say, "Big mistake. It was a
I don't
big
think in this
mistake."
business you should ever like treat
No.
anybody, because a lot of times if you're going up, they're coming down, or vice versa. And
It's
I'm
a
like,
roller
this-
coaster.
It's just, and why would
Yes.
you do that anyways? We're all human beings. Like that should
She's
be
probably
like,
kicking her own ass right now.
I hope she
Well,
is.
you know, and
but
and to be
I'm
honest,
the same way.
it's-
I laugh at awkward times. Like, okay,
yeah, well,
she
because
just did that.
it was like that really just fucking happened. Like you're just sitting there, like, how old are we?
Literally.
Like you
Yes.
can't sit at my table, type of thing. And it's like, yes, we write young adult, but we don't have to act like, you know,
You're in high
we're
school.
High schoolers.
preteen. Like, you know what I mean? Like, but I don't, to be honest with you, I'm positive. I don't even think she remembers. I don't even think it mattered to her.
Well, if
Like
she's
that
listening to this podcast, I'm sure she's gonna remember it, and she's gonna have a hard time going to bed tonight.
Yeah. But
I
it's,
was that bitch.
Yes. So
shit.
I can imagine then that this has not gone the way you thought it was. I bet this has been, we know it's a wild roller coaster, like the last few years, especially starting off, but it sounds like yours was even crazier because you did start out with the YA and getting picked up randomly and seeing an industry change so drastically.
Yeah, it's been crazy watching how much it changes. I mean, you know, the one thing that it has taught me, like, I don't know who said it, and it's true. The industry publishing is a cycle. There is only a handful of select chosen ones, you know what I mean? And they're not chosen by anybody other than probably the readers who will rise and continue to rise and stay up there.
Mhm.
Everybody else will go like a roller coaster. They're going to have ups, they're going to have downs. They're going to have ups, they're going to have downs. And that is the vast majority of us. That doesn't mean you're less successful, less popular, whatever. It's just that there's only, it's almost like there's only, I know everybody hates to say there's always space for everybody. That's not what I mean. It's like, but I think for those authors who kind of get up there and then they just stay there, there's only space, I think, for like a handful every couple generations.
I agree with that. I think people get so upset about that. I'm like, well, there's room for all of, like you said, in the area where we're up and down, but there is a top tier that, no, I'm sorry, there is a select, like, you know, it does, not
it's
everybody
like
can fit. You can't have
everybody generally
in first
they're
place,
trendsetters. They're generally trendsetters, but also with the ups and downs, your ups and downs may be on an incline also. So you might have these wild turns and these like sudden drops, but as long as you're headed on an increase, that's great, unless you're not good with cash flow, which we did have a podcast episode where we talked about how difficult it is to manage this as an actual business, especially as an indie author. When you don't know anything, you don't know what's to come, and those low lows can definitely hit you kind of hard. So
well, yeah, and it's you definitely have the dips, and you're right. Like if you're still seeing like a steady, like slow and steady wins the race type of thing, your dips are not going to be as bad each time, right? You're gonna dip, but you're not gonna dip.
Mhm.
But that's not to say that won't happen. Like, and that has happened to many people, and that doesn't mean that's it. Throw the towel in. Nobody's going to read your book anymore. It's just that it is a cycle. It is a constant ever changing of what people are looking for, what you're writing. And I think a lot, that's the hardest thing, I think, for even, you know, when I was starting out, to remember that, you know, what goes up must come down.
always.
Mhm.
Always. Is that a Ouija board in the background?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
I just saw it and I got so
I saw it
excited.
too. I love it.
It is
the reason for all the storms yesterday. That was
right.
you.
know.
It is actually one of the original Mystic trays from
cool.
what is it?
Milton Bradley. Is that it? No, they were.
Yes, but they were called somebody else. At that
Yeah.
They actually
Um,
were created in New Orleans. Wasn't it in New Orleans? Is where
No, they were created in either Baltimore. I think they were created in
Boston. Our Talk Books is by Salem.
Yeah, so
It was
it's
Salem,
Baltimore, Philadelphia, and Chicago produced them for that
For that
board
one.
game. But also keep in mind, people created their own, right? Like you just
Right.
need
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I don't mess with that.
But that thing,
yeah.
No,
I don't, yeah.
was made in the 20s.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
So
Love that.
I don't use it.
Don't you have a lot of hauntings? Aren't things always haunting you? Maybe, Jennifer.
Maybe it's that. I only had like one, like growing up, I lived in a very old home that was very, very creepy. And there were things that people saw there. I never really experienced anything there, but like I had friends who did. But it wasn't until I moved, honestly, as an adult to a different house where it was like just constant crazy stuff, like where you would just be like, did that really happen? Like, did I just hear that? But it was never a bad feeling. It was never like you weren't scared. You definitely would get unnerved. Stephanie, who runs a polycon, the first time she had came to that house, there was like the sound, and it's so cliche. There was this sound of a ball falling from a shelf in the office, but I didn't have any balls in there. And at this point, I'm just used to these sounds, right? I'm just like, I'm just talking to her in the kitchen table. She's like, I don't even acknowledge it. And she stops me and she's like, are we just going to pretend that didn't happen? I'm like, yeah, that is what we're going to do. My mama taught me, you don't engage. And that's what I don't do. I don't engage.
Yes, exactly. I totally believe in that stuff. When I was younger, we lived in this townhouse and it had a sliding back door. And the one night I swore somebody came in and stood over me, like they were looking at me, and I kept the cover over me and I was like, don't do anything, don't do it. And it was not a friendly ghost. This was not your friendly ghost playing ball in the office. This was something that felt wrong. And I told my mom in the morning, I said, somebody broke in last night. And she told me that I was being silly and also that I was never allowed to sleep downstairs on the sofa anymore. But it wasn't until later on that I had a similar feeling later. And someone was like, well, ghosts don't haunt places, they haunt people. Have you ever felt this way before? And I told her that, and I was like, that it actually like mirrored up with me. So I'm a creepy believer. I believe in all that stuff, but I don't use the Ouija board. That is I always cast a circle, and I don't try to talk to the dead. Yeah.
I played as a teen. I'm sure I messed with Ouija board as a teen.
Yeah.
This belonged to a neighbor lady who was like our surrogate grandmother. And when she was going into the nurse, this is a terrible story. I sound terrible. She was going into the nursing home, and we were cleaning out her attic, and I found it, so I took it.
Yeah. So maybe it's her in your office.
That anymore? That's her. She's like,
I was like, she was very religious. She was a very religious woman, and so I just remember being so shocked to find this Ouija board in her attic. But it wasn't until honestly a couple of years ago that I turned the board over and saw that they had serial numbers on it. And I think I was watching like a ghost show and they referenced it, and I was like, wait a minute. And then I just never looked at it, and there were all the serial numbers, and I put it into the computer and immediately came up where it was made, how old it was. Yeah. And I was like, oh, wonder how many people have messed around with this board.
Yeah. That is so cool. I personally loved that aside. I think that is awesome. And I loved your terrible story. I thought it was wonderful.
I know. I'm like, that's awesome. Plus it's funny because we'd make that ghost story into a book, but we'd make it hot. Like not bad. Yeah. We'd make him a bad ghost. But
I don't think you stole it though. I think you rescued it. You gave it
well, you know what the funny thing is like, so at that house we were having all these experiences in. My husband doesn't believe in any of that stuff, but then he had an experience in there. It was funny because it took him like almost all day to even broach the subject with me because I think he could not, process it. So when we moved out of that house, I was like, I decided I was going to, and this is ignorant again, I'm a terrible person. So as you know, the Ouija boards, they're pretty much like, you kind of got to fuck somebody with it. Like you just, you leave it behind. You don't destroy it. Some people say burn it, but other people say absolutely not. Don't do that. You just kind of gift it to someone, which I'm like, which I would love just to gift someone a Ouija board for Christmas and be like, Merry Christmas. So I was like, I'm going to leave this Ouija board behind in the closet. Sorry, new people moving in. It's your problem if it's a problem. And when we moved out, like my husband had done like this final, like making sure we didn't miss anything, right? Which he always misses things, like always. And this time he left behind an entire Christmas tree, all the Christmas decorations, all this stuff he forgot to get. but he found that damn Ouija board in a closet that I literally put it in a random closet in a bedroom that we didn't even use. And he found it and brought it to the new house.
Well, I think that's fate. That board is
Yes.
meant to be yours right now. Yeah.
And I was like, are you kidding me? It's like, you actually got this? But yeah, so it's fate now. I can't get rid of it.
Yeah.
But if it falls over and while we're doing the interview, I'm out.
I'm staying if it does. I'm gonna ask
Yeah,
you
me
some
too. I want to
questions.
see what happens.
But I actually have read one ghost romance and I actually loved it. I was like a little bit angry during parts of it, and now I'm like, shit, I can't say that because if we say the title, I don't remember the title of it.
Yeah.
But I
was trying to actually think if I've read any.
It was like a historical, or not even a kind of like a half historical because he's a ghost, but it was like set in Scotland, so there were the accents and
Oh, there you go.
yeah, and there was a period of time where he was physical, so that was needed, obviously.
I can't think of any actual like full length. Like I've read like short stories, like short erotica stories that really, don't have to really explain anything.
Right.
Like there's no plot to speak of. I mean, that's not what you're reading it for. And so you don't have to actually wait a minute. How do we explain this a little bit scientifically? Like none of that exists in it. But I'm actually curious. I would like to read one to see how
it was good. I'll figure out what it was and I'll send it to you. And it was a mild irritance about as soon as he turns physical, basically he leaves to do family business and then comes to F her. And I was like, this is that order is background or backwards.
Backwards.
That was my only mild.
But that's your final act, right? How
Yes.
in contemporary or paranormal, there's always that final, like everything's great, but no, it's not. So that was the final, oh God, are they going to get together or not?
Yeah.
So speaking of like reading and all that stuff, what inspired you to start writing? What were you reading at that time, or were like, I'm going to write, like I'm going to do this?
Well, as cheesy as it sounds, I always wanted to be, ever since I was a teenager, I wanted to be a writer. I had read, so when I don't know how old each of you are, but when I was a teenager, there wasn't a large young adult section. You would go into a bookstore called Walden Books, which does not exist anymore.
No,
it does not, sadly.
And it would just be like one bookcase with young adult books, and it was mostly just R.L. Stine, Christopher Pike, a couple others. One of them was L.J. Smith. And my parents had gotten me, like, I think the Vampire Diaries for Christmas.
Yes,
and so a lot of people who remember the TV show didn't realize those books came out in the 90s. And I remember reading that on Christmas. And the third book ends on a cliffhanger. It was very sad. And it was the same year that Saving Private Ryan came out on DVD or VHS. I don't remember. But my parents were in the living room. They're watching that. And I'm reading this book. And it's the very opening of Saving Private Ryan. Like where everybody, there's just it's just death everywhere. Yeah. And I'm over here crying over a fictional vampire. While everybody else is like getting super choked up based on like real, things that happen in life. And my mom had thought that I was actually like, at first that I was paying attention to the movie. I wasn't, but like it was just, I'll never forget that. But that was that moment where I was like, I know this isn't real. These characters do not exist. I should not be upset. It's not real. And then I thought that's just kind of amazing that you can create something that's completely fictional and evoke that type of emotion. And, and it's not that I want to make people cry. I'm not that type of author. But like, I wanted to be able to do that, to create something that people, get so invested in that they actually care about it. And that's kind of where it started from. But also, I was reading Joanna Lindsay at that time, like the old school historical, romance stuff. And so I just loved that feeling of being able to create that type of world. And that's where it kind of started from.
And I love that you talk about that emotion, because one time I got into it with one of my English teachers. I read a book. I do know what book, but I won't say the title. I hated it. And I said, like, I don't understand, like, what, like, I was saying something about it was a bad book. And she was like, well, a book that evokes emotion is a good book. And I said, all it evokes is hate, that I had to read that. But I think that
sounds like such a
book
teenage
good
response.
book. Yeah, I hated this book so bad. I mean, it did make me, I see now what she was saying, but at the time I couldn't see past my own opinion. But yeah, the emotion is where it's at. And we really do have such a large influence, and so positively so, on the community. And I know you specifically do have a lot of opinions, especially with some of the backlash that controversy can bring up, like slut shaming and smut shaming, and just the sex negativity that's ingrained in our culture. So I think we're doing a huge win in the right direction by writing specifically explicit romance.
Yeah, I just did an interview with, I think it's with Bustle, where they talk about that. And it was actually funny. That's what the interviewer said. It's like, do you feel that writing explicit sex scenes helps remove the shame, and the taboo surrounding sex? And 100%, I think that's a yes, right? It's like, I don't even think anymore that's an opinion. That's obviously, we're seeing that. It also, not only does it make people, I think, feel more comfortable in exploring their sexuality, it also exposes them to, relationships, way other people choose to handle their relationships that they've never been exposed to. So I do think, in a way too, there is also that additional value that it helps create tolerance or foster an understanding that just because you haven't lived this life, you can now maybe read about it and start to learn about it. Because even though it might be in a fantasy book, or it might be in a ghost story book, right? Yeah. There's still like these things about romance that the wider publishing industry as a whole never seems to grasp, is that most romance novels, and even erotica, often has messages in those books. It's just not shoved down your throat. And so it's like, people, whatever message you're trying to send, you do actually reach more people, because they don't realize, that you really are preaching to them. Yeah. But you're doing it in a way that it's not, a turn off to them. Right. And I think that's something that's so overlooked in the romance world, is that people don't take it, they don't realize that. But I also have an unpopular opinion, I think, for a lot of, I do not like the word smut. Every time
I found my sister in this. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm coming from I think, and we talked about this before, where I think for the younger generation, it's making a positive impact by saying smut and calling it our porn and all. But I don't think that for outside of our community, for anything other than the younger generation, it's not making a positive impact, and it allows a lot of misogyny and backlash and stigma to remain.
And I would probably go as far as to probably say that it doesn't do much good even for the younger generation outside of the publishing community. Like the younger generation that doesn't read a lot, they hear the word smut and porn, and they have this already, view of it in their head.
So that's where I would disagree, because I do think the younger generations are more sex positive, just from conversations, including men. We are seeing a lot of men, and we're bringing in a large readership from the younger generations. I think partly because we're using that verbiage. I do, like, I don't know the statistics about the growth of the romance specifically for, what is the demographic, but I would argue, and I put good money down, that it's the younger generation, and it's because of that verbiage and that challenge almost of like owning it and being out there with your sexuality.
They're trying to own it, but I don't necessarily think that word is still, I think it's a lot of taking something like Jennifer's book and somebody says smut before it, and you're going to now take away some readers that were like, oh, I was going to read that, now it's just smut. We're not equal to other men fantasy author writers, because never, even if they have sex in it, you're never as equal.
Well, it's usually, if it's fantasy and it has sex in it and it's written by a man, it's like not the positive type of sex.
No,
Mhm.
and but
It's
you say
usually
the word
blood or
smut,
rape.
You're right.
and even women have still, and maybe you said maybe it's younger. I obviously am not young anymore, so maybe I'm not seeing it as much. But
We're still
I
young.
still
We're,
feel
we're
I don't feel that. But you know, I definitely still feel like I'm getting maybe the older view of that's just smut. They immediately
Right.
put it down. Immediately, it's less than. You know,
Well,
it's
I
There's
not
a
also-
negative
far.
connotation with that word,
Well,
definitely,
yes.
especially the time that we grew up.
So
Yeah.
also, but when we just had this recent controversy, and I was skimming through the
Which
comments
one?
of somebody, the one with the hockey players
Oh,
that went viral, right? That one, it had a very large reach. And I saw a video who was somebody just explaining it. And in the comments, there were comments of that we should bring the stigma back, put the romance books back in your nightstand where they belong. People are too ashamed to be reading that kind of thing. And I had a conversation because I got very worked up. And obviously, I have a larger presence on TikTok, and it was difficult for me not to respond. And I wouldn't have responded to that specific comment. I would have like censored out names and not actually drawn light to it and everything. And my team was basically like, those people always thought that. They're just using a controversy to use that as leverage.
Yeah,
and you're
and
never
I-
going to change their mind.
they're never going to change that. The one thing I think that we are all working against, though, is in the publishing industry as a whole, and whether you're self-published or you're traditional or hybrid, you're still a part of that cog, right? You're a part of that machine, and they still view smut and fairy porn and things like that as being less than. And I mean, I think traditional publishing has gotten a lot better in this aspect, but still, even though that is what pays the bills,
I was just
at
about
the
to say,
vast majority of publishing houses,
where the money
it is-
goes is where they'll
yeah.
go.
yeah,
Yeah.
but they still
Yeah.
look down on it. You know,
Mhm.
they've gotten a lot better. Most of them have gotten a lot better, but you still run into a lot of and this is definitely the older population in publishing who are like, well, you know, we're publishing this so that we can publish the books that matter, which is usually like the literary fiction, things like that.
Which blows my mind because that's completely denying the positive impact that sex positivity and sex education and emotional coping and relationship journeys have in this world where we literally fucking need more love. Like, I don't know if anybody's looked around, but everybody should read a fucking romance book so that we have a better day. Like,
well, the one thing used to get me when I was writing pretty much young adult was, you know, how careful you had to be, because my young adult had sex on the page. It's just I couldn't have, like, I had, you know, I didn't name body parts, and I had to get very creative on how I would describe it, so it would be considered like gratuitous. However, nobody bats an eyelash at the violence at all.
I talk about that all the time. It's so fucked up because
and it's like that is more acceptable than
even
a
though
consensual relationship.
Violence is morally negative. Sex is something that's supposed to be positive. And yet, like, I make it make sense. I've done so, like, I do think that we're changing and we're getting to a positive place with it. But it is like, I think I'm going to be old in a rocking chair by the time that conversation changes and it's not viewed that way.
America has a much more Puritan, I mean, view of things. And so you go to
Country is
Europe and
founded.
and so it's a lot, I mean, you go to Europe and it's a lot less. But I've actually had a woman reader. She said, she basically attacked me for the sex in my books and said, I have a 6-year-old. I would rather him read basically violence, like people murdering, slaughtering each other, than him to read a sex scene. And I'm like,
well, I would also be like, if he's 6, why is he reading either of these two?
But just that was her
How about
point
being a
of, like,
parent?
Someone told me, or go ahead.
The love is like, you know, here it is, like, I'd rather murder than love, you know, and it's just like, oh my God, our world.
Someone told me on YouTube, my daughter was signing books with me. I let her, I signed 4 books and they accidentally got sent out because my husband didn't know that pile she had drawn in. She drew flowers and stuff in the beginning of books. And somebody commented, so I did a post and it was like, it was funny or whatever. It ended up going viral. It was a great post to just be like, hey, I'm sorry. I'm going to figure out whose boxes these are and send you other ones. These ones are autographed by my daughter. And someone said it was triggering that I would allow a child to open up a book like that or even hold it. And I was like, I have some like kids. They also they jump on my bed and I fuck my husband there. Is that triggering to you? Like, there's actual sex that occurs there. She can't fucking read. Like, she could not read. Like, and it wasn't like she was skimming it and like highlighting words. Like, she was on the title page. Like, and I'm sitting right next to her, and I was just like, how fucking ridiculous is this? And then instead of commenting, I just was like, well, that's for them. That's not for me. I don't know if they need therapy or what, but that is something for them, and that is not for me.
I'm like, we grew up on VC Andrews with, incest and molestation.
I grew up, like, again, there wasn't a wide choice as a young adult. So I was reading Joanna Lindsay in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Those are true bodice rippers, where it's complete, every single book is dubious consent.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it is, these books, I love them. They're my go-to read. But I still love them, realizing they're super problematic. Like,
I write dubious sometimes. But
you don't.
But it's advertised as
not
such.
up on the same.
Correct.
The same level as that. But I think I've turned out pretty fine.
Yeah.
The only thing is that I may have had like an extremely higher than normal expectation of what an orgasm felt like, based on like what I was reading. I thought I was going to be like floating in the sky or something.
Yeah, fireworks were going to go off.
Still,
I'm like, where's my damn fireworks?
Like, why did they make the sun like this lasted 10 pages, which I would assume would have to at least be something, like it's and that's it. And I think that, like, again, I think a lot of it is like that Puritan values. And look, here's the thing, at the end of the day, I don't expect people to be comfortable with everything. What I do expect from you is that you don't enforce what you're comfortable with onto other people. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we're seeing that. I mean, that's a totally different podcast, but like, we're seeing that.
We've talked about it on here, that there's been legislation that has been proposed for censorship, and how alarming it is. Like, you can talk about it if you want to. Yes. Yeah. And it's absolutely alarming.
The libraries where the kids used to go in, why they want a physical book, the libraries, they can't almost do that in some, states
in some districts. They've completely removed them because they're waiting. I think this is in Florida. They're waiting for the list of approved books, because now they can't, or this was a few months ago. There were libraries that were completely empty because they were told you're not allowed to stock anything unless it's on an approved list, and they weren't given one. So
I mean, you have teachers who are just quitting because they don't. They run the risk of being sued because the laws have been passed. But I'm over here like, Florida. Leprosy is now endemic in Central Florida,
isn't it?
You have bigger fucking problems to worry about.
Such bigger problems.
Well, and maybe open a book.
Right? It seems like some of you may need to read more. I just throw that out there.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's like there's much bigger
knowledge is power.
Yeah. And I just think we've said it before. I think Stacy was the one who said it, that if you're banning books, you're on the wrong side. Period.
Yes.
Just like
that's not opinion. That's not opinion. That's
if you don't like it, shut the book. If you don't want, if you know what it's about and you don't want to read it, don't read it. Oh, that was such an easy problem to solve. You know,
and also it's like history has proven where that leads to eventually.
It does.
Where this starts.
Yeah.
And it's an act of control. And the thing is that gets me is that the people who are often behind this are very much usually like very anti-controlling of the government, right? They don't want, they don't believe the government should have a lot of say in what they can own, what they can do.
But just
except for what they
exactly. And well, that's where the Puritan mindset comes right into play. Yeah. And we've also mentioned that on the podcast as well. So you are in green light territory.
Yeah. Go for it.
Just so you know.
We love
we get down to the nitty-gritty. No, the only thing that we don't do is say explicit names on here. And if we accidentally do, we'll bleep it out. Within the community anyway. But 100%. Like it's never a good sign. And we've seen it with a lot of the LGBTQ. I think what Red, White, and Blue was on a ban list, wasn't it? Not this summer, but the one before it, which is so alarming to witness. And I think that, like you're alluding to, that's where it starts. That's exactly.
It wasn't Sarah Moss on it. Like, I mean, it was just like they were like pulling names. I'm like, what?
It's very much we're living Fahrenheit 451.
Yeah.
If you're familiar with that book, we're living it right now.
One of the books I did an anthology many years ago. It's behind me. It's called Meet Cute, and that was banned in many states. And
Meet
the
Cute?
only
Was that the one
Meet
with how?
Cute.
Is that the one? It has a Cupid on the
No, I
cover?
don't think so. This
No.
is an anthology, and it came because I think there was a romance book that came out recently with that
Is it
title.
cute? Okay, just
Yeah.
kidding.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
kidding then.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and it's just an anthology of a bunch of authors.
So
And
you've
I'm
had
like,
a book
y'all,
banned.
yeah, but it wasn't because it wasn't the story I wrote. I mean, we all know why. It's because it had LGBTQT stories in there.
So this was
And,
banned
you know,
by
that's
legislation, not
well
by like
in certain
Amazon.
states. Yeah, yeah, no, in
That's
certain states. Yeah, in
oh
Texas,
my
I think,
goodness.
and I only found out about it that was notified is because alphabetically my name often will get listed first.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? And then I'm like, well, we all know why this is being banned. I mean, it's just it's sad. I the things that it's like wag the dog, right? Which is politically, it's like look over here, look over here. Meanwhile, the really bad shit's happening over here.
Yeah.
And I do think that some of it is wag the dog. You want to direct people's attention away from something else, but it's so depressing because it's like it's targeting communities that already are struggling as it is, marginalized communities, and to make them even feel more of an outlier, more of othering them even more.
If I could be if I could be just a little bit of an extremist, it's reminiscent of genocide, denying existence, removing presence, and attempting. And I have an uncle who's still in the closet, has been in the closet my whole life. We all know that he's gay, but he will never say it. And when you go to his house, he'll deny sharing a room, at least to my mother, who very much would be pro what we're discussing right now, pro banning books. And even though she's very staunch, you can't tell me what to do, but I can tell you what to do. And I think that the connections with that is what has led to my uncle being the way he is. So it's very alarming on a personal level for somebody he's the only LGBTQ apart from a couple of friends, like my immediate circle. He's the only one I can point to. And even for his sake, I can say like, this is so highly damaging because it's attempting to erase his existence. Like, and that is alarming to see because like you said, we've seen it before. We've seen history repeat itself.
Yeah. And but if you take that, then it leads to, they will like, we can no longer write what we write as we do now. They'll start controlling only these authors can write, basic Hallmark kind of stuff, and then it will get more and more and more, so it's going to get down to our careers will be gone,
But I didn't know that that's happening in Texas right now.
Yeah, it's happening in some areas in Texas where there's like legislation trying to be passed regarding explicit material. And I know that I don't know a lot about it. But I know that a bunch of booksellers, like bookstore owners and librarians they were petitioning, like, we can't, who gets to decide what's explicit? Like, you know what I mean? It's like, this is but it's a slippery slope. And, they're going to try to take out the minority first. Like they're going to go for what they believe is going to be the easier target. And at that
point,
they
can get a group of people to agree, yes, this is bad.
And then they can get
they'll
this
stab them in the back.
Yeah. And then you have the other part of that group who really isn't like paying attention because it doesn't affect them until it does.
The problem.
Yeah.
They came for blank and I said nothing. They came for blank and I said something. They came for me and nobody was there. That's whatever that quote is that I just butchered. I have been drinking all night and I'm feeling excellent. So
we're like such a heavy topic. She's like, excellent.
I know, right?
But, the thing is but again, like with romance tackles a lot of this stuff. Like, you know what I mean? And lots of times in very hidden ways that one of the things that I would, that always got me with my one series, the Lux series and then the Origin series, it had aliens like coming from outer space and they could assimilate, look human when they wanted to. But like, long story short, spoiler alert, it's been out for 10 years. I don't know what to tell you if you haven't read it. But like aliens had like the rest of them came, they invaded, they were not friendly. And then eventually the ones who stayed, humans were afraid of them because obviously some of them are bad. Then they tried like this basically assimilation program. And I modeled a lot of it off of real life stuff that's happened in the past, and how governments, when there's something going on or they want to have more control, usually you will basically exploit some type of event, whether it be war, a pandemic, something that has society as a whole unstable. And then at that point, you then give those people something to blame or someone to blame.
Mhm.
You give them a target that you then can blame all your problems on this group of people. And I had kind of, I was doing that in the series, and and basically, like, it was very clear that they were moving these people into like assimilation centers, which were basically camps of sorts, like, not so much to the point of like the types of concentration camps that you saw over in Europe, more like the ones you saw in America that they don't talk about with the Japanese. So like I was modeling them very much like that. And I remember like people who, like I would see them get like upset reading it, like not, upset like they're supposed to, right? They're like, this is wrong. But then sometimes I would be friends with some of them on Facebook, and I would see some of their other posts about immigration.
Yes.
And
like,
I would be sitting here like, so wait a minute.
You're reading my book wrong if you're not getting it.
Yeah.
Cognitive dissonance. Yeah, cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, it's like you have a problem with my fictional aliens who are literally aliens being like disappeared basically. But you have all these other thoughts and opinions about real life people who are risking their lives, like to the point, I mean, many of them never even make it here. Like they don't make it here to do it the correct way. And it just always blew my mind. It was like, if you have a problem with this in a fiction story, you might want to, I don't know.
Yeah.
Read
I get
readjust.
Yeah. I get
like,
very political in my books. Like I write like, they are what's happening right now. And then I'll get people like, they'll look the same thing going, okay, you're not reading my book then. If you're, I mean, like, you're not getting it. Like, yeah, those are the bad people.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it's that paralleled universe where we can experience something without having to consciously say, oh, I feel this way because X. Like it's the same thing with dark romance when you can parallel things. But one of the things that I like to say, and I'm going to add, if I haven't been banned, but I'm like, are you really doing something good if you haven't been sued, if you haven't been put in jail, or if you haven't had a book ban? So like, I'm going to add that.
Oh my God, I got the list. I got my list now.
Yes, yes, because I intend to make as positive an impact as I can. And I think that having these things in the book where readers can feel it, even if it hasn't hit home yet, even if they do have cognitive dissonance and they're keeping everything paralleled, at some point it will hit them. At some point it will resonate. And like I like to say, they're going to have a difficult time sleeping that night.
Yep.
Yeah. Because that's my thing. It shouldn't take for it to actually affect you for you to care.
Like, unfortunately, I think that's a person problem sometimes. Yeah. That's a them.
That seems to be our country now. I don't know what's happening, but I feel like we were much more community. Now it's all individual. It's all me. And it's
so
just like
a lot of it is COVID and post-traumatic. Like there's something like 49% of people have post-traumatic stress syndrome and they don't even realize it. And that can obviously change your actions and your mindset and the way you're treating others, especially in a culture where we don't have a lot of health systems in place for mental health and mental well-being, and a culture that tells a lot of men to suppress it, and a culture that is a patriarchy.
I think this is
so a lot of men are in
COVID.
control. Yeah. Oh well, yeah. But I think it's really resonated since then, though. Like I think it's been heightened since then. Yeah. And you have a lot of men.
Yeah, I think COVID was a tipping point. Like it was too many people were at home with too much time on their hands. And not in a good way. Like
we fell off the cliff.
People were finding things they should have never found. And I do think it became like a tipping point. But also I think too is we're also on the cusp of a massive generational shift, right?
Yes.
Because these fuckers gotta die sometime.
I was just about to say, and it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen because they
And
can't live
the way
forever.
it looks like it, some of them are gonna do it right on live TV in the middle of an interview. Like,
I know,
just,
right?
Jesus.
I was like, oh, so close, so close.
Like, I'm like, somebody go get him.
I am ready for
Right.
somebody
The
to be
Reaper.
making
Come on,
vlogs
Reaper.
who's actually going to experience them. Like, it's insane that the people who,
I
yeah,
agree.
we've definitely gone super political. This has been absolutely wonderful, and there's a ton more to go. So, do you mind staying around for a little while so we can dig into some things?
Of course not. Happy to be here.